tonight, if you listen very quietly, you might hear it too. A silver cat walking alone beside a frozen river, following the gentle lantern reflections like threads of gold on ice. In a small medieval village wrapped in snow, the witch's cat can read the echoes hidden in doors, stones, and windows, soft memories of kindness that were almost given and promises that were almost kept. As the snow falls slowly and the lanterns glow with warm honey light, the night opens like a calm, safe dream just for you. Let the witch's cottage, the quiet pines, and the soft footsteps of the cat carry you away from the day and lead you gently toward deep, peaceful sleep. On most maps, the village did not exist. It was too small, too quiet, too content to call attention to itself. It lay in a gentle hollow between low, rolling hills, where the land folded like a sleeping blanket, and the sky seemed to lower itself just a little closer, as if it wished to listen. By day, the village was simple. Thatched roofs, crooked chimneys, stone walls softened by moss and time. Chickens wandered the lanes, children traced patterns in the dust, and the small marketplace murmured with the easy rhythm of barter and gossip. Yet it was not the sights of the village that made it special. It was the echoes. The villagers themselves did not speak much about this, perhaps because it felt as natural to them as the changing of seasons. But if someone very quiet, very attentive, happened to press an ear to a doorframe or hold a palm against a kitchen table that had known many meals, they might sense it. A faint, soft vibration, like a sigh that had taken a long time to exhale. Every stone, every spoon, every wooden shutter held the memory of what had passed before it. Laughter did not simply vanish. It settled into the beams. Tears did not disappear. They fell into the grain. Even ordinary words, good morning, sleep well, be safe, hid themselves in the walls like shy birds, waiting to be heard again. At the eastern edge of the village, where the houses thinned and the fields widened into gentle meadows, there stood a small cottage with crooked eaves and a garden that always looked a little wilder than the others. Herbs spilled over stone borders, drying bundles of lavender and rosemary hung from the beams, and a narrow path of river pebbles led to a dark green door. This was the home of the village witch, a quiet woman with soft hands and patient eyes, who healed fevers, mended hearts as best she could, and spoke to the wind as if it were an old friend. Her name was known, but most people simply called her the witch, spoken without fear, as one might say, the baker or the miller. She lived alone, but not quite, for in this cottage lived Loon. Loon was a small cat with pale silver fur and eyes the color of dawn, mist over a river. To most villagers, she looked like any other cat. She slept on warm stones, stretched in patches of sun, and walked with the quiet dignity that cats wear like a cloak. But Loon was different. Where other cats listened to birdsong and rustling leaves, Loon listened to time. When she settled herself by the hearth and curled her tail neatly around her paws, she could hear the echoes that hid in objects as clearly as a bard might hear the music in a lute string before it is plucked. A clay mug near the fire might hum softly of winter evenings, hands clasped around hot broth, breath rising in white curls. A wooden stool might murmur about tired feet and whispered prayers after long days in the fields. The old kettle on the stove remembered every slow, peaceful hour of tea, every quiet conversation, every small comfort given and received. To Loon, these were not just traces. They were stories, woven together with warmth and patience, and she read them the way other creatures might read tracks in snow. On this particular evening, the village was drifting gently toward sleep. The sun had slipped beyond the western hills, leaving behind a wash of soft violet and deep blue that slowly darkened into night. One by one, the villagers closed their shutters, banked their fires, and lit small candles that shone like tiny stars behind glass panes. A calm wind moved through the lanes, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, baked bread, and cooling earth. Overhead, the sky grew clear and deep, and the first true stars appeared, steady and silver, as if someone had placed them there with deliberate care. Inside the witch's cottage, the evening had also grown quiet. The witch sat in her old armchair by the hearth, a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her fingers curled around a cup of nettle tea. The fire burned low and steady, its flames gentle and amber, casting warm light that brushed the walls and turned the hanging herbs into soft silhouettes. Loon lay across the witch's lap, her body warm and relaxed, paws tucked neatly beneath her chest, her breath rising and falling in calm, steady waves. The witch's hand moved slowly through Loon's fur, following the familiar path from head to tail, as if tracing a lullaby. In that hush, the echoes around them grew clearer. Loon's ears twitched slightly, and her eyes half opened, gleaming faintly in the firelight. She could hear the kettle's memory of laughter from earlier that day, when a neighbor had come to share a story and borrowed a little courage in the form of hot tea. She could feel the old oak table, remembering years of candlelit evenings, of bread sliced and prayers murmured, of gentle hands and soft voices. Even the floorboards beneath the witch's feet whispered of footsteps long gone, light and slow, like fading footprints on a forest path. It was all peaceful, all familiar, and Loon let these echoes wash over her like a warm tide. They made the air feel full, yet light. They made the cottage feel safe and held, as if everything that had ever been kind within its walls still lived there in some quiet, invisible way. Outside, the night deepened. The wind moved across the thatched roof with a faint hush, brushing past the chimney, then wandering on to trace a path through the village. Somewhere, a dog gave a single, sleepy bark, and then there was silence again, soft and complete. Then, as the clock that hung above the hearth chimed softly and calmly, something shifted. It was a small change at first, barely more than a ripple at the edge of perception. Loon felt it as a thin, cool thread in the warm tapestry of sound and memory. The echoes in the room seemed to pause, as if turning their attention toward a distant note. The kettle quieted, the table stilled. The old armchair beneath the witch's weight seemed to sigh and then listen. Loon raised her head fully now, silver eyes clear, ears angled toward nothing obvious, and yet toward everything at once. The new echo did not belong to the cottage. It did not belong to the day that had just passed, nor to the season gently breathing outside. It was older, colder, yet not harsh. It felt like the shimmer of light on snow at dawn, like the soft crunch of boots on frozen ground, like breath puffing white into clear winter air. It carried with it the distant clink of bells, the faint rustle of wool cloaks, the hush of flakes falling slowly, steadily, kindly. Loon felt the echo touch her whiskers, her ears, the space just above her heart. The witch, half dozing, felt Loon's body go still and opened her eyes. "What is it, little moon?" she murmured, voice slow and quiet, her words blending with the crackle of the fire. Loon did not answer in any way a human would understand. Yet the witch's fingers continued their gentle path through the cat's fur, as if to say, "I am here. I will listen with you." The new echo swelled just a little, like a soft breath drawn in before a story begins. Loon closed her eyes again, but now she was not drifting into sleep. She was listening. Behind her closed lids, the cottage faded, and she saw instead the village beneath a heavy sky of winter blue. The thatched roofs were dusted with snow that glowed faintly under a pale sun. Smoke rose in thin, straight lines from chimneys, vanishing into the cold air. Children in thick cloaks and knitted mittens chased each other, their laughter clouding like mist. Market stalls were laden with winter roots, coarse bread, and steaming pots that scented the square with herbs and warmth. Yet the scene felt far away, not in distance, but in time. The clothes were a little different, the tools slightly older, the shapes of the houses less worn. The echo wrapped itself around Loon gently, tenderly, as if inviting her to step closer. She saw a cart rolling slowly through the snow, wheels creaking, pulled by a patient horse whose breath rose in white plumes. She heard a woman's voice calling a name that no one in the present-day village bore. She watched a flurry of snow descend like soft white feathers, settling on the stones, on the roofs, on a child's bright red scarf. Loon's tail flicked once, the only outward sign of the journey that had begun within her. The witch sensed the change in her small companion and smiled faintly, as if a secret had just passed from the air into the cat's keeping. "Some echoes," she whispered, half to herself, half to the night, "are only shadows. Some are songs, and some, my dear, are doors." The fire's light softened, glowing gold against the darkening ceiling. Outside, the moon rose higher over the sleeping village, silver and serene, painting the roofs, the fields, and the distant line of woods in pale, quiet light. The wind slowed to a gentle murmur, as if it, too, wished not to disturb what was unfolding. Within the cottage, wrapped in warmth and listening to the faraway winter day that had taken place 200 years before, Loon felt something within her heart settle into place. She did not yet know where this echo would lead. She only knew that it was calling, softly and steadily, like a bell heard through falling snow. And somewhere deep inside, beneath her fur, beneath her small, steady heartbeat, she began to understand that this night would not be like other nights. The village was asleep, peaceful and unaware, but time itself was stirring, and the echoes were opening a path that only a gentle, silver-eyed cat could read. The night in the present lay soft and complete over the village, like a dark velvet cloak lined with silver thread. Inside the witch's cottage, the small hearth fire burned low, its glow gentle and steady, painting the walls with warm, wavering amber. The witch's breathing had grown slower, calmer, her head tilted slightly back against the worn armchair as sleep drifted close. Loon remained curled upon her lap, a small, warm weight of fur and quiet life. Yet her eyes were no longer fixed on the room around her. Behind those pale, mist-colored eyes, another world had begun to unfold, delicate and clear as frost on a window pane. The echo that had first touched her like a distant bell now expanded, not as a noise, but as a feeling, a soft and shimmering presence filling the air between heartbeats. It was winter, but not the winter outside the cottage walls. Loon felt it rather than saw it at first. The precise chill of the light, the way the air itself seemed to glow white at the edges, the gentle resistance of snow underfoot. In the echo, the village rested under a sky, the color of milk and pale slate, where the sun was more suggestion than disk, a soft brightness hidden behind layers of cloud. Snow lay over the roofs in smooth, unbroken curves, softening angles, rounding edges, making even the sharpest chimneys look gentle. Smoke rose in faint, straight columns, each one tinted a cool blue as it climbed into the sky. The usual colors of life, warm browns, reds, greens, folded themselves into quieter tones, wrapped in white, as if the whole village were sleeping inside a dream of snow. Loon's awareness drifted through this winter day without weight, without sound. She moved as an unseen listener, a reader of the silent, shining script of time. The echo was not a single moment, but many moments gathered together and held in a long, peaceful breath. She sensed the clear ring of church bells somewhere in the distance, softened by the blanket of snow until they became a gentle shimmer in the air. She felt the hush of flakes falling, steady and unhurried, each one a tiny star that surrendered itself to the earth. She caught the muted rhythm of footsteps on packed snow, the quiet brush of woolen cloaks, the faint rustle of bare branches stroked by winter wind. None of it came to her as sharp sound. It arrived as layers of feeling, cool yet kind, old yet still alive. The village itself was younger in this echo, and Loon could tell not by counting years, but by the shapes of things. A tree that she knew in the present as a great, sheltering giant was here only a slim, brave sapling near the square, its branches thin and hopeful against the pale sky. A house that now bore the weight of ivy and moss on its walls appeared bare and newly built, its stones fresh, its lintel uncracked. Some cottages she recognized, though their roofs were less bowed, their windows clearer. Others did not yet exist, leaving wide spaces where, in Loon's own time, walls and gardens would stand. Yet the bones of the village, the curve of the lane, the position of the well, the way the hill rose gently to the west, were the same, and that sameness settled her heart. Time had changed the clothing of the place, but its quiet soul remained. Closer to the square, Loon's attention was drawn to a cluster of people wrapped in thick cloaks and woolen shawls, their breath rising in small white clouds as they spoke to one another. A stall stood there, wooden and simple, its surface dusted with fine snow from the morning flurries. On it, loaves of coarse bread steamed faintly in the cold air, and a pot of soup sent soft curls of fragrant steam upward, carrying the comforting scent of herbs, onions, and root vegetables. Children hovered at the edges of the gathering, stamping their small boots to keep warm, cheeks pink, noses red, mittens damp where snow had clung and melted. Their laughter was not bright and sharp, but round and muffled, softened by the snow and by time, and to Loon it sounded, or rather felt, like warm embers under a quiet ash. All of these impressions flowed through her gently, like water under thin ice. She could move her focus with the smallest intention, drifting toward the memory of a door closing with care, then toward a window where a hand placed a candle on the sill, its flame steady and gold against the pale day. She sensed the presence of animals as well. A dog curled in the shadow of a woodpile, tail tucked neatly around its paws, hens huddled close together in a sheltered corner of a yard, a horse standing patiently in the square, breath pluming, eyes soft and dark. The winter was not harsh in this echo. It was quiet and serious, but not cruel. It wrapped itself around the village like a cool, white blanket, stern but not unkind. Through it all, Loon remained physically still on the witch's lap, her small body rising and falling in a calm rhythm. The witch's hand continued its slow, familiar journey along her back, fingers tracing the silky fur between shoulder blades, then following the curve of her spine. The witch did not know in detail what Loon was seeing, yet she felt the depth of the cat's listening, felt the way the air in the room seemed to grow finer, clearer, as if all the tiny threads of sound and memory were being gently drawn together. In her half-dreaming state, she remembered her own words, spoken earlier when she had sensed the echo's arrival. Some echoes are shadows, some are songs, and some are doors. Now, in the soft hush near sleep, she breathed those words again, barely more than a sigh, and they folded themselves into the moment like a blessing. The echo deepened. Beneath the simple winter scenes, the market, the chimneys, the quiet lanes, Loon felt another note, subtle and tender. It was not sorrow exactly, not in any sharp way. It was something gentler, like a promise spoken softly and then misplaced, like a candle that had been meant for a certain window but never quite found its way there. This feeling spread through the echo like a faint color tinting clear water, not overwhelming what was already present, but adding a quiet undercurrent. It was this note, more than the snow or the bells or the muffled laughter, that drew Loon's attention inward toward the heart of the winter day. Somewhere in that long ago afternoon, someone had wanted to do something kind and had not quite managed it. The intention lingered in the stones and the beams like a soft exhale that had never fully ended. Loon did not know yet that this intention belonged to a small child with a red wool scarf. That certainty would come later, when the echoes sharpened and narrowed. For now, she sensed only that the winter day was gently incomplete, like a story paused before its last quiet chapter. The realization touched her with a strange tenderness. She, who had listened to echoes all her life, knew that most of them were finished things. Laughter that had run its full course, tears that had been shed and soothed, words that had been spoken and then answered. This echo, however, held an open space in it, a place where something simple and loving had been meant to happen, but had not. It was this open space that called to her more softly and more steadily than any sound. On the witch's lap, the warmth of the present wrapped around Loon like a comforting cloak. The fire murmured, the shawl's wool brushed her side, and the witch's gentle heartbeat pulsed through the layers of cloth between them. She was safe here, cherished, held. The past, with all its snow and its unfinished promise, could not harm her. It could only invite her to listen more deeply. In that safety, the choice took shape within her as naturally as breathing. She could simply observe, as she had done so many times before, letting the echo pass through her like a soft breeze, or she could follow it, step by step, until the distant winter day unfolded completely. Loon's silver eyes opened a little, reflecting the faint light of the embers. For a moment, she saw both worlds at once. The dim cottage with its herbs and wooden shelves and sleeping witch, and the bright, pale winter square with its slow-falling snow and quiet villagers. The two scenes layered over each other delicately, like transparent veils. She felt no confusion, only a sense of gentle possibility. The echo was no longer just a distant murmur. It had become a path, a direction, a quiet beckoning. It was as if time itself had extended a hand, made of light and memory, and was waiting patiently to see if she would place her small paw in it. She did not move her body, but something inside her shifted forward with calm resolve. Lune was, after all, the witch's cat, born under a silver moon and raised in a cottage where the past was treated with kindness, not fear. She had listened to echoes since she was a kitten, batting softly at the invisible threads of memory that wound through the rooms. She had learned that stories, even old ones, could be soothed by attention, just as a frightened animal could be soothed by a steady hand. Now, as the winter echo shimmered before her like a pale doorway of snow and light, she allowed herself to lean into it as gently and naturally as she would lean into the witch's touch. The moment she chose, the echo responded. The scenes of the winter day drew a little closer, their outlines sharpening like stars coming into focus as the night deepens. The market sounds, still soft and muted, grew a shade clearer. The pattern of snowflakes seemed to slow, as if waiting for her to step among them. Somewhere in the depths of that distant afternoon, a small heartbeat quickened, sensing her attention across the years. Loon felt none of this as urgency, only as readiness, as if a story 2 centuries old were taking a calm breath and opening its eyes. In the cottage, the witch's hand rested now, still and warm, upon Loon's back. The fire flickered once and settled, sending a final, gentle wave of heat into the room. Outside, the present night stars shone steadily over the thatched roofs, and the wind moved in soft strokes over the village, unaware that one small cat was listening her way across time. With the quiet poise of moonlight stepping onto snow, Loon let herself pass through the echo's threshold, carrying with her the warmth of the hearth, the peace of the sleeping village, and the silent promise that she would only ever walk gently in the past. The winter day from 2 centuries ago opened before her, waiting, peaceful and unfinished, like a dream ready to be read. For a while, Loon simply rested in the cradle of the witch's lap, letting the strange winter day from long ago hover softly inside her like a second, paler world. The cottage around her was warm and dim, all amber and shadow and the gentle breath of herbs. But beneath that comfort, she felt something finer beginning to take shape. The echo of the past, which had first arrived as a wide shimmer of feeling, drew in upon itself and brightened. It gathered, the way mist gathers into a stream, until Loon sensed it as a single, delicate line running through the quiet of the room, spun from the heart of that distant snow to the present hearth. She opened her eyes. The familiar shapes greeted her with a tranquil certainty. The oak table gleaming softly in the firelight, the shelves of jars, the dark curve of the kettle above the embers, the bundles of drying lavender and thyme. The witch slept deeply now, head turned, hands loose on the arms of the chair. At the small window, the night pressed close, and a spill of moonlight lay across the sill like milk poured slowly from a jug. Nothing here had changed, and yet the air felt subtly different, as if someone had drawn a faint silver thread through it and left it humming. Carefully, so as not to disturb the sleeping woman, Loon rose. She stretched in one long, slow arc, paws extending, back curving, tail unfurling, before stepping from the witch's lap onto the polished arm of the chair. For a heartbeat, she stood there, poised between warmth and coolness, between the safe hollow of the shawl and the open air of the room. The thread of echo brushed through her then, not as sound but as touch, like the finest strand of silk passing along her whiskers and through her chest. It carried a faint impression of whiteness and pine, and the thin, clear ring of distant bells, and it waited with patient softness. Loon stepped down onto the floor. The boards murmured under her paws, a small, familiar creak that was more welcome than complaint. Around her, the cottage's own memories stirred, the hearth recalling nights of quiet talk, the table remembering hands kneading dough and slicing bread, the walls holding the soft echo of old lullabies and whispered comfort. These were warm and kindly and known, and she let them brush against her like friendly tails. But she did not linger. Threading lightly among them, she felt the finer, cooler current of the winter echo, winding through the room like a narrow stream of moonlit water through darker earth. It gathered first around the kettle. Drawn to that spot, Loon padded closer and set one small paw against the rounded iron. The metal was warm, but beneath that warmth, the kettle's long memory rose to meet her touch. She felt steam rising on many mornings, cups filled and refilled on many evenings. The soft murmur of voices that had leaned close over its spout. Woven among those familiar scenes was one bright, particular winter day, when the kitchen air had been sharper, breaths more visible, words slower and more thoughtful. The silver thread ran through that image like a gleam of light on dark water, then moved on, tugging gently toward the far corner where a simple broom rested. She followed, unhurried and silent. As her flank brushed the broom's smooth, worn handle, another echo woke, dry and soft, like dust lifting in a shaft of sun. The broom remembered swept thresholds and cleared corners, the small, orderly comfort of putting things right at the end of a long day. It, too, had known that winter day. Loon sensed a single doorway, heavy with cold light, a thin crescent of snow just inside the sill. The hesitation of small boots cued there, as if someone had stood a long while, balanced between inside warmth and the bright, uncertain white beyond. Again, the silver line shivered through that memory and slipped onward. From the broom, the echo curved across the room toward the low shelf by the window. Loon leapt lightly onto the oak table and walked its length with a poise that barely stirred the bundles of herbs resting there. Moonlight washed over her back, turning her coat almost white along the spine. On the shelf, a copper cup waited, its surface burnished by use, its shallow dents and faint scratches like tiny letters written into its skin. Loon lowered her head and touched it with her nose. A clearer note answered her, bright and bell-like, the memory of biting cold water, breath fogging above the rim, hands cupped gratefully around the metal as warmth spread inward. In the curved reflection on the cup's side, she glimpsed, for the briefest moment, the village square of that other day. Snow laid smooth and pale, footprints stitched across it in soft lines, and near the ground, a little streak of red, vivid against the white, like a single thread woven into plain cloth. The picture was small and blurred, but the feeling it carried was distinct, a quiet expectancy, as if many small things were moving gently toward a meeting that had not yet happened. Loon let the image settle within her, adding its color and shape to the growing melody of impressions. Kettle, broom, cup. Each had taken a drop of that winter into itself and kept it, their memories now joining into one soft current, leading outward. She sat for a moment on the table, tail folded neatly around her paws, and listened inwardly. The cottage breathed around her in slow, peaceful rhythm. The fire shifted, sending up a tiny plume of sparks that vanished almost at once. Beyond the window, the present night village lay quiet under the moon, roofs edged with faint frost, chimneys exhaling pale smoke into a sky scattered with steady stars. Over that still picture lay the sense of the older winter, cool and bright and unfinished, like a second, paler reflection resting upon a dark pond. The silver thread touched her once more, this time reaching toward the wooden door. Loon leapt down and padded across the room, placing her cheek against the worn planks. The door's own echo rose slow and deep, countless hands on the latch, footsteps passing in and out through seasons of mud and dust and snow. Among these, she felt again that particular winter pause, a light body lingering on the threshold, breath quick and visible, something precious held close beneath a cloak. To anyone else, the door was shut and silent, but for Loon, there was already a quiet opening where the silver line passed through. Breathing in the sense of smoke and herbs and a faint imagined chill, she let her eyes fall to soft slits and stepped inward along the shining, soundless thread. Gently, like a cat slipping through a narrow crack, she followed it beyond the cottage and out into the layered night, where her paws began to feel the remembered crunch of snow that had fallen 200 years before. If you'd like to continue, just say, "Write part 4, and we'll follow Loon out into the sleeping village. Ban Danoi. Continue writing the next part. Remember to strictly follow the plot and table of contents. Each part should be about 1,000 words. Write the story in calm, soothing style, ensuring it reads like the work of a skilled writer in a traditional novel format. Maintain a smooth and flowing narrative, avoiding excessive paragraph breaks. Express ideas in well-structured paragraphs, each containing multiple related descriptive sentences. Use detailed descriptions and seamless transitions to connect ideas effectively. Maintain a steady narrative pace, avoiding overly short or disjointed sections. Ensure cohesion between paragraphs, creating a continuous and immersive reading experience, akin to a traditional literary novel. Maintain fluency and smoothness throughout. ChatGPT Danoi. Loon did not feel the world tilt or spin as she crossed from the warmth of the cottage into the hush of the older winter. She felt only a soft deepening, as if the night had taken one slow step inward. Beneath her paws, the wooden floor became packed snow, cool and faintly glittering, and the air grew clearer, edged with that gentle crispness that fills the lungs and makes each breath feel newly born. For a heartbeat, she heard both the quiet crackle of the present hearth and the soundless fall of long vanished flakes. But then the cottage faded like a dream upon waking, leaving only the stillness of the winter day from 2 centuries ago. The silver thread she had followed did not vanish. It lay like a shining path just at the edge of her senses, guiding her through a village that was both strange and intimately known. The houses stood close around her, their roofs heavy with snow that curved in soft white blankets over beams and tiles. Eaves wore thin crystal fringes, little icicles catching the pale light like rows of glass bells. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight, slender lines, then spread slowly into the sky, where a pale sun rested behind a veil of cloud. Loon's paw prints appeared in the snow, delicate and precise, yet no one turned, no voice called out in surprise. She was moving through echo, not matter. The people of that day could not see her, though she walked at their thresholds and brushed past their doors. The village carried on in its quiet rhythm, unaware that a small silver cat was reading its memories. She went first to a door she knew well in her own time, a stout wooden thing with a habit of sticking in damp weather. Here it was newer, the grain of the wood still clear, the iron latch dark and only lightly worn. As Loon approached, she felt a low, contented murmur rise from it, like a slow chord in a gentle song. She pressed her cheek against the cool surface, and the door opened not outward, but inward within her mind. She saw, as if standing just inside the threshold, the shape of a kitchen bathed in winter light. A woman set a pot upon the fire, while two children unwrapped scarves and mittens, their cheeks glowing with cold, their fingers clumsy with numbness. Boots thudded softly on the floor as snow fell from their soles. A jug of milk steamed near the hearth, and the air was thick with the scent of onions and bay leaves. There was no great drama here, no sharp joy or sorrow, only the deep, peaceful comfort of home after a walk in the snow. The door remembered it all, holding the warmth and the light and the murmur of small voices like treasures. Loon stepped back, and the vision faded gently, leaving behind a lingering warmth in her chest. The silver thread tugged her left, and she followed it along the narrow lane. Snow crunched quietly beneath her paws, each step producing a delicate echo of its own that seemed to fold into the larger memory. The sky above was a tender, muted white, and now and then a faint flake still drifted down, its path slow and serene. She moved past a low wall where frost traced lacework patterns on stones, past bare bushes whose branches held tiny pearls of ice. The world felt held, as if everything were pausing together in a long, calm breath. At the next house, a small window drew her more than the door. Its glass was slightly warped, catching the pale daylight and turning it into a soft blur. Loon leapt lightly onto the wooden ledge and touched her nose to the cold pane. At once, the glass shimmered with memory. Inside, she glimpsed a narrow room, crowded with threads and cloth. A loom pressed against one wall, skeins of yarn hanging like muted rainbows, a basket of wool by a stool. An older man sat with his hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed, listening as a younger woman, his daughter, perhaps hummed a winter tune while she worked the loom. Snowlight spilled over the floorboards, turning them pale. In a corner, a tiny cradle rocked with the faintest motion, stirred only by the rhythm of the woman's foot on the loom's pedal. The window remembered the song most of all. It held those gentle notes for years after the sound had faded, keeping them safe behind its glass. Loon let the tune wash through her like warm tea and moved on when it had settled into her heart. She began to notice how each door and window carried its own hue of the day, its own small piece of the winter story. At one house, where the door was painted a dim, faded green, she felt the echo of early morning, someone sweeping snow from the threshold, someone else laughing softly at the way it piled up again. At another, where shutters framed a square of glass, she sensed the hush of midday, children tracing patterns on the frosty inside of the pane, their fingers leaving clear trails. A third door, narrower and flanked by stacked firewood, remembered the careful setting down of a basket, the delicate adjustment of its contents, the way someone checked again and again that nothing was forgotten before stepping out into the cold. As she passed, Loon assembled these fragments the way a patient hand gathers tiny beads onto a string. The day unfolded in her awareness not as a straight line, but as a circle of small, shining moments. Morning chores, midday rest, the steady fall of snow, the slow turning of the pale sun behind clouds. In each memory, there was a quiet undercurrent of preparation, as if the whole village were tilting gently toward something that had not yet happened. Fires were tended, loaves cut, scarves tied, candles were placed ready upon tables, though their wicks were still dark. It was an ordinary winter day, yet it glowed with a faint, nameless expectancy that made Loon's ears quiver. At the center of the village, the square lay like an open palm, its stone softened by layers of snow. The well stood there, wearing a cap of white on its roof, its bucket rope dusted with frost. Here the echoes were stronger, braided from many footsteps and many voices. Loon circled the well, her tail low and calm, and brushed against the stone. A cool, deep hum rose from within, carrying the memory of water drawn up in careful hands, of jokes traded while waiting in line, of secrets whispered beneath breath. Today's echo today, 2 centuries ago, held a gentler note. Fewer people, quieter voices, a sense of space around each sound. The well remembered the pale sky reflected faintly in its dark surface, and one small figure standing a little apart, watching the snow as if it were speaking. From the square, the silver thread extended outward into the lanes like a soft line of light, and Loon followed it, weaving past doors that watched her without seeing. Each threshold she passed added something to the winter melody. The scrape of a chair pulled closer to the fire, the sigh of a log settling in the hearth, the dull, kind clink of a spoon against a bowl. Windows showed her glimpses of hands braiding bread, of a girl plaiting her hair by the faint light from the sky, of an old woman mending a mitten with slow, sure stitches. None of these scenes were grand, yet together they formed a tapestry of quiet life, each thread supporting the next. As she walked, Loon began to understand that the winter day she was reading was not special because of some great event, but because of how gently it had been lived. The villagers had moved through it with the same steady care they gave to their other days, unaware that time would one day fold this one up and tuck it away in the stones like a soft handkerchief. And yet, beneath all the ordinary tasks, the same undercurrent of tender longing persisted, a kind of collective inhale before a kindness, a readiness that had not found its full expression. It was not a loud feeling. It lay in the way a mother smoothed a child's scarf one extra time before sending them out, in the way a candle waited beside an unlit lantern, in the way an extra bowl was set at a table, just in case, and then quietly removed. Loon paused before a particularly old door, its wood already bearing the first faint lines that in her own time would deepen into the heavy grooves she knew so well. This door, more than the others, seemed to hold its breath. When she pressed her forehead against it, the echo unfurled in a small, steady stream. She saw a pair of worn boots by the threshold and a cloak hung carefully on a peg. She felt the thought of someone within, turning toward the door in their mind, but not yet in body, wishing for a knock that did not come. A single candle burned on the table, though the light outside was still adequate. The flame leaned now and then toward the door, as if listening. Loon's heart, small and steady, softened a little more. The day she was walking through had left a gentle imprint in the village, but the imprint in this house felt particularly tender, as if something had been awaited with quiet hope and had quietly failed to arrive. When she stepped back, the sensation lingered like the afterglow of a fading sunbeam. The silver thread shimmered again, leading her onward, telling her that there was more to see, more to gather. She obeyed willingly. Each door she brushed, each window she touched with her whiskers, added another petal to the slow blooming flower of understanding within her. The past did not rush her. It opened gradually, like a blossom unfolding at dusk, each layer revealing another soft, fragrant fold. Loon moved at the same gentle pace, her steps measured, her gaze calm, her heart quietly attentive. By the time she had made a full, unhurried circle through the lanes and returned once more to the edge of the square, she carried within her a clear, if delicate, picture of the winter day. The muted light, the steady fall of snow, the simple tasks, the unspoken expectation. The village, young and snowbound and unaware of being remembered, lived on in its echo as peacefully as it had in its moment. Yet beneath all the white and all the calm, there remained that single open space, that unfinished note. Loon knew now that this day had been special because of something that almost happened. Somewhere among all these doors that remembered winter, a small heart had wished to reach another, and the wish had not fully found its way. She felt no sadness in this realization, only a gentle determination, quiet and soft as the snow beneath her paws. The silver thread was still bright before her, and she knew that if she followed it a little further, it would lead her not just to doors and windows, but to the very center of the story, a small figure in a red wool scarf, carrying a promise through the falling snow. Loon did not feel the world tilt or spin as she crossed from the warmth of the cottage into the hush of the older winter. She felt only a soft deepening, as if the night had taken one slow step inward. Beneath her paws, the wooden floor became packed snow, cool and faintly glittering, and the air grew clearer, edged with that gentle crispness that fills the lungs and makes each breath feel newly born. For a heartbeat, she heard both the quiet crackle of the present hearth and the soundless fall of long-vanished flakes. But then the cottage faded like a dream upon waking, leaving only the stillness of the winter day from 2 centuries ago. The silver thread she had followed did not vanish. It lay like a shining path just at the edge of her senses, guiding her through a village that was both strange and intimately known. The houses stood close around her, their roofs heavy with snow that curved in soft white blankets over beams and tiles. Eaves wore thin crystal fringes, little icicles catching the pale light like rows of glass bells. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight, slender lines, then spread slowly into the sky, where a pale sun rested behind a veil of cloud. Loon's paw prints appeared in the snow, delicate and precise, yet no one turned, no voice called out in surprise. She was moving through echo, not matter. The people of that day could not see her, though she walked at their thresholds and brushed past their doors. The village carried on in its quiet rhythm, unaware that a small silver cat was reading its memories. She went first to a door she knew well in her own time, a stout wooden thing with a habit of sticking in damp weather. Here it was newer, the grain of the wood still clear, the iron latch dark and only lightly worn. As Loon approached, she felt a low, contented murmur rise from it, like a slow chord in a gentle song. She pressed her cheek against the cool surface, and the door opened not outward, but inward within her mind. She saw, as if standing just inside the threshold, the shape of a kitchen bathed in winter light. A woman set a pot upon the fire while two children unwrapped scarves and mittens, their cheeks glowing with cold, their fingers clumsy with numbness. Boots thudded softly on the floor as snow fell from their soles. A jug of milk steamed near the hearth, and the air was thick with the scent of onions and bay leaves. There was no great drama here, no sharp joy or sorrow, only the deep, peaceful comfort of home after a walk in the snow. The door remembered it all, holding the warmth and the light and the murmur of small voices like treasures. Loon stepped back, and the vision faded gently, leaving behind a lingering warmth in her chest. The silver thread tugged her left, and she followed it along the narrow lane. Snow crunched quietly beneath her paws, each step producing a delicate echo of its own that seemed to fold into the larger memory. The sky above was a tender, muted white, and now and then a faint flake still drifted down, its path slow and serene. She moved past a low wall where frost traced lacework patterns on stones, past bare bushes whose branches held tiny pearls of ice. The world felt held, as if everything were pausing together in a long, calm breath. At the next house, a small window drew her more than the door. Its glass was slightly warped, catching the pale daylight and turning it into a soft blur. Loon leapt lightly onto the wooden ledge and touched her nose to the cold pane. At once, the glass shimmered with memory. Inside, she glimpsed a narrow room crowded with threads and cloth, a loom pressed against one wall, skeins of yarn hanging like muted rainbows, a basket of wool by a stool. An older man sat with his hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed, listening as a younger woman, his daughter, perhaps hummed a winter tune while she worked the loom. Snow light spilled over the floorboards, turning them pale. In a corner, a tiny cradle rocked with the faintest motion, stirred only by the rhythm of the woman's foot on the loom's pedal. The window remembered the song most of all. It held those gentle notes for years after the sound had faded, keeping them safe behind its glass. Loon let the tune wash through her like warm tea and moved on when it had settled into her heart. She began to notice how each door and window carried its own hue of the day, its own small piece of the winter story. At one house, where the door was painted a dim, faded green, she felt the echo of early morning, someone sweeping snow from the threshold, someone else laughing softly at the way it piled up again. At another, where shutters framed a square of glass, she sensed the hush of midday, children tracing patterns on the frosty inside of the pane, their fingers leaving clear trails. A third door, narrower and flanked by stacked firewood, remembered the careful setting down of a basket, the delicate adjustment of its contents, the way someone checked again and again that nothing was forgotten before stepping out into the cold. As she passed, Loon assembled these fragments the way a patient hand gathers tiny beads onto a string. The day unfolded in her awareness not as a straight line, but as a circle of small, shining moments. Morning chores, midday rest, the steady fall of snow, the slow turning of the pale sun behind clouds. In each memory, there was a quiet undercurrent of preparation, as if the whole village were tilting gently towards something that had not yet happened. Fires were tended, loaves cut, scarves tied. Candles were placed ready upon tables, though their wicks were still dark. It was an ordinary winter day, yet it glowed with a faint, nameless expectancy that made Loon's ears quiver. At the center of the village, the square lay like an open palm, its stones softened by layers of snow. The well stood there, wearing a cap of white on its roof, its bucket rope dusted with frost. Here, the echoes were stronger, braided from many footsteps and many voices. Loon circled the well, her tail low and calm, and brushed against the stone. A cool, deep hum rose from within, carrying the memory of water drawn up in careful hands, of jokes traded while waiting in line, of secrets whispered beneath breath. Today's echo today, 2 centuries ago, held a gentler note. Fewer people, quieter voices, a sense of space around each sound. The well remembered the pale sky reflected faintly in its dark surface, and one small figure standing a little apart, watching the snow as if it were speaking. From the square, the silver thread extended outward into the lanes like a soft line of light, and Loon followed it, weaving past doors that watched her without seeing. Each threshold she passed added something to the winter melody: the scrape of a chair pulled closer to the fire, the sigh of a log settling in the hearth, the dull, kind clink of a spoon against a bowl. Windows showed her glimpses of hands braiding bread, of a girl plaiting her hair by the faint light from the sky, of an old woman mending a mitten with slow, sure stitches. None of these scenes were grand, yet together they formed a tapestry of quiet life, each thread supporting the next. As she walked, Loon began to understand that the winter day she was reading was not special because of some great event, but because of how gently it had been lived. The villagers had moved through it with the same steady care they gave to their other days, unaware that time would one day fold this one up and tuck it away in the stones like a soft handkerchief. And yet, beneath all the ordinary tasks, the same undercurrent of tender longing persisted, a kind of collective inhale before a kindness, a readiness that had not found its full expression. It was not a loud feeling. It lay in the way a mother smoothed a child's scarf one extra time before sending them out, in the way a candle waited beside an unlit lantern, in the way an extra bowl was set at a table, just in case, and then quietly removed. Loon paused before a particularly old door, its wood already bearing the first faint lines that in her own time would deepen into the heavy grooves she knew so well. This door, more than the others, seemed to hold its breath. When she pressed her forehead against it, the echo unfurled in a small, steady stream. She saw a pair of worn boots by the threshold and a cloak hung carefully on a peg. She felt the thought of someone within, turning toward the door in their mind but not yet in body, wishing for a knock that did not come. A single candle burned on the table, though the light outside was still adequate. The flame leaned now and then toward the door, as if listening. Loon's heart, small and steady, softened a little more. The day she was walking through had left a gentle imprint in the village, but the imprint in this house felt particularly tender, as if something had been awaited with quiet hope and had quietly failed to arrive. When she stepped back, the sensation lingered like the afterglow of a fading sunbeam. The silver thread shimmered again, leading her onward, telling her that there was more to see, more to gather. She obeyed willingly. Each door she brushed, each window she touched with her whiskers, added another petal to the slow blooming flower of understanding within her. The past did not rush her. It opened gradually, like a blossom unfolding at dusk, each layer revealing another soft, fragrant fold. Loon moved at the same gentle pace, her steps measured, her gaze calm, her heart quietly attentive. By the time she had made a full, unhurried circle through the lanes and returned once more to the edge of the square, she carried within her a clear, if delicate, picture of the winter day. The muted light, the steady fall of snow, the simple tasks, the unspoken expectation. The village, young and snowbound and unaware of being remembered, lived on in its echo as peacefully as it had in its moment. Yet beneath all the white and all the calm, there remained that single open space, that unfinished note. Loon knew now that this day had been special because of something that almost happened. Somewhere among all these doors that remembered winter, a small heart had wished to reach another, and the wish had not fully found its way. She felt no sadness in this realization, only a gentle determination, quiet and soft as the snow beneath her paws. The silver thread was still bright before her, and she knew that if she followed it a little further, it would lead her not just to doors and windows, but to the very center of the story, a small figure in a red wool scarf, carrying a promise through the falling snow. The square lay open and still within the winter echo, a white, quiet heart at the center of the village. Loon stood at its edge for a moment, letting the softness of the scene settle into her eyes. Snow carpeted the stones in a smooth layer, broken only by a few sets of footprints that crossed and recrossed one another in looping paths. The well rose from the middle like a watchful guardian, its little roof sprinkled with white, its bucket rope hanging motionless. The pale sky pressed gently down, and the light diffused through the thin clouds until everything seemed edged in silver, as if the day itself were wrapped in frost glow. No wind hurried through the square, no sharp sound disturbed it. The world here was quiet and listening, as if waiting for something small and important to appear. The silver thread of echo that Loon had been following drew her attention now toward one side of the square, where an old stone bench rested along the wall. In her own time, she knew this bench well. She had watched the witch sit there in summer, shelling peas and telling stories to passing children, had seen elders warm themselves in the spring sun, had felt the stone's deep hum of patience. Here, 2 centuries earlier, the bench was younger, its edges less worn, its surface smoother. Snow lay upon it in a soft curve, like a white cushion. As Loon approached, she felt a subtle brightness gathering around it, like light pooling in a shallow basin. The bench, more than anything else in the square, held a concentrated echo of the winter day. She leapt lightly into the snow-dusted seat, her small body leaving an impression that the people of that time could not see, and placed one paw against the cold stone. Immediately, the echo woke, not with a jolt, but with a slow unfurling, like a scroll being unrolled or a flower opening in cool air. The bench remembered weight, someone sitting, someone small, feet not quite touching the ground. It remembered warmth pressed into its chill surface through layers of wool and cloth. It remembered the gentle swing of legs, the pattern of boots tapping lightly in the snow, the faint sound of breath that quickened with thought. The stone had held that moment carefully, keeping it safe long after everyone who had passed through the square that day was gone. Out of the quiet, the shape of a child emerged. Loon saw the figure as if sketched in soft lines over the winter light. Small shoulders wrapped in a dark wool cloak, arms folded inward, hands tucked close to protect something hidden. Around the child's neck, bright against the muted tones of snow and sky, was a red wool scarf, its ends slightly frayed, its color deep and warm like the heart of a coal in a banked fire. The scarf glowed in the echo more vividly than anything else, as if all the tenderness of the day had chosen it as its home. It framed a face that was not remarkable in any worldly way. Round cheeks, a small nose reddened by the cold, hair tucked under a cap, but to Loon it seemed luminous with quiet feeling. The child sat on the bench with the particular stillness that belongs to those who are thinking very hard. Boots dangled and brushed the snow, making tiny furrows with their toes. From beneath the cloak, carefully shielded from the cold, the child drew out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Loon leaned nearer, her whiskers tingling with curiosity, not prying, but listening. The echo did not show every detail sharply. It softened the edges the way falling snow softens roofs and roads, but she could sense the nature of the object more clearly than its shape. It was simple, handmade, prepared with care. There was a faint memory of candlelight on it, of hands working late into the evening, of someone's lips moving silently in a hope-filled murmur as they tied a knot. The bench remembered the way the child's fingers touched it now, as if afraid both to hold too tightly and to let go. In the echo, the child's gaze was fixed not on the square, but on a point beyond it, where the lanes narrowed and led out toward the far houses, and further still, to the edges of the village. The eyes, dark and thoughtful, held a look that Loon recognized, though she could not have said from where. The look of a heart balancing between shyness and courage, between the warmth of what is known and the pull of what is kind. The child's chest rose and fell in small, visible breaths that turned briefly to mist before disappearing. Each breath seemed tied to a thought, each mist cloud a tiny promise cast into the cold air. Loon could feel those thoughts as gentle ripples in the echo, words not spoken aloud but clear, repeating softly like a refrain. I must go. I must not be afraid. Someone is alone, and I can bring a little light. The stone bench held all of this with deep calm. It remembered the child's weight shifting forward and back, the way cold seeped slowly through the cloak, the way fingers tightened on the bundle whenever doubt passed through the small body. It remembered the long pause before movement, that delicate, suspended moment in which a choice is made not in grand declarations, but in the simple act of standing up. Loon, listening, felt that pause settle into her own small bones. The child was not thinking of themselves as brave. They were simply thinking of someone else, somewhere beyond the square, who might be watching the snow fall alone. And that thought, quiet and tender, was what drew them finally to their feet. When the child rose, the red scarf shifted and flared slightly, catching a hint of the pale light and offering it back in deeper color. The bundle was tucked carefully beneath the cloak once more, held close to the chest. Little boots pressed fresh tracks into the snow beside the bench, and the stone remembered the final touch of a hand resting on it for balance. A brief, affectionate pat, as if the child were thanking it for sharing the moment of stillness. Then the figure turned, shoulders lifting, as if bracing against a wind that was not yet blowing, and began to walk toward the narrow lane that led out of the square and toward the quieter edges of the village. Loon watched, her silver eyes following every slow step. The people moving at the fringes of the square paid the child little mind. A woman carrying a basket passed at a distance, her thoughts on her own hearth. A man leading a horse paused to adjust a strap, his gloved hands fumbling with the stiffness of the leather. The world of that winter day continued in its gentle way, unaware of the small promise wrapped in red wool and hidden cloth. Yet to Loon, the child seemed to shine softly against the pale background, as if the echo itself had brightened around them. She could not walk beside the child or brush against the little legs. She was a reader of the scene, a listener inside the stone's memory. But even as an unseen witness, she felt something in her become acutely protective, the way she felt toward the witch's quiet heart or toward a candle left too near an open window. She rose lightly from the bench, leaving no trace upon the snow, and padded after the child's echoing footsteps. The silver thread that had guided her through doors and windows now ran ahead, woven into the child's path. It carried the soft imprint of determination, like a line drawn gently but firmly across fresh parchment. As Loon followed, she noticed how the very air around the child seemed to hold its breath. The snow fell a little slower in her awareness, flakes swirling in loose spirals before settling. The houses on either side of the lane leaned inward just a little, as if listening. Even the bare branches of a nearby tree, dark against the pale sky, traced a shape above the child that looked to Lune like a quiet blessing. With each step, the child moved further from the center of the village and deeper into the part of the echo that Loon had not yet explored. The noise of the square, the faint clink of pots, the low murmur of voices faded into the background, becoming a kind of soft music behind the more vivid, soundless beat of the child's heart. Loon padded along, her own heart matching that rhythm in calm empathy. She did not rush ahead. She had no wish to pierce the delicate fabric of the moment. Instead, she stayed just behind, close enough that if the child could have sensed the unseen, they might have felt a small, gentle presence walking with them, like a quiet star at their back. As they reached the end of the lane, where the cottages grew sparser and the open fields began, the echo broadened again, giving Loon a clearer view of what lay ahead. The distant line of trees, still and dark, held the memory of a house nestled beneath silent pines, a place where a single candle often burned in a window. She felt the soft tug of that waiting light even before she saw it in the echo. Between here and there lay more snow, more stillness, more unspoken thoughts, but now the heart of the story had a face and a color, the thoughtful gaze of a child, and the warm red of a wool scarf moving through a white world. Loon paused for a moment, allowing herself one last look at the square and the bench. The stone seat sat quietly, its role completed for the day, yet the warmth of the child's small body still clung to its memory like a faint, pleasant heat. The well stood steady, the houses watched, the snow fell. The echo of the winter day had given her its clearest, kindest image, and it was enough to carry her forward. Turning once more toward the child's retreating figure, Loon followed the silver thread of sound and light out of the square, her gentle heart now firmly linked with the promise that beat beneath a red wool scarf in the soft, ancient snow. The child with the red wool scarf walked on, small boots making a careful trail away from the square. Luna followed in the echo's wake, her paws leaving no mark, her presence as light as a breath on glass. Around them, the village stretched out gently, houses thinning and small gardens appearing between low stone walls. Snow lay smooth on each wall, and bare twigs poked through like the strokes of a delicate ink drawing. The sky held steady in its pale, soft brightness, and the air was quiet, carrying only the faintest rustle of distant branches and the muffled rhythm of footsteps. Nothing in the scene was harsh. Winter here was calm and serious, wrapping the child and the unseen cat in a quiet, silver stillness. The bundle beneath the child's cloak shifted now and then, drawing Loon's attention. Though the echo did not give her every detail, she sensed its nature clearly, a small offering, humble but prepared with care. The memory that clung to it was made of lamplight and whispered thoughts, of fingers clumsy with sleepiness and yet unwilling to give up their task. A little thread tugged at Loon from the past within the past, and she understood that to truly read this winter day, she would have to look not only at the path before the child, but also at the moments that had led to this walk. Echoes, she knew, rarely began where one first heard them. They curled back upon themselves like shells, hiding their origins in quieter corners. She paused beside a low gate where the child's path bent slightly. The wood was rough and simple, a farm gate rather than a town door, but it, too, remembered. Loon brushed it with her whiskers and let her awareness slip into its grain. The gate recalled many small exits and entrances, farmers going out before dawn, children carrying baskets, dogs bounding through with joyful leaps. Among these impressions, one stood out with the clarity of fresh snow. A small figure, earlier that very day, standing on tiptoe to look across the fields toward the far edge of the village. The child's breath had formed tiny clouds as they watched the distant line of trees, thinking of the house that lay beyond them and of the single, faithful candle often seen in its window. The gate had listened to a quiet promise spoken not aloud, but inwardly, a promise folded gently into the child's heart like a letter slipped into a pocket. "I will go," the promise had said. "I will bring some light. No one must be alone while the snow is so deep." With that understanding resting tenderly inside her, Loon let the echo draw her further back, away from the gate and the lane, and into the softer, earlier light of the same winter day. The village rearranged itself at the touch of her attention, reforming not in space but in tone. Morning thickened around her, paler and less defined, like milk swirling into water. She found herself in a small, modest room, its walls close, and its air scented with wool and dried herbs. This was the child's home. The memory belonged to the two earthy objects. Here, tables and chairs and tiny treasures, and they offered it to her without resistance. On a narrow bed lay the red wool scarf, not yet wrapped around a small neck. It had been folded with more care than such a simple thing might usually receive, corners aligned, tassels smoothed. Beside it, on a small table, lay the beginnings of the bundle, a piece of cloth, worn but clean, waiting to be wrapped around what the child would soon place there. The table, its surface shining faintly where countless hands had rubbed it smooth over the years, remembered the child's elbows resting there, their chin in their hands, eyes distant. Snow had been falling outside even then, touching the window pane with soft kisses. The child had watched the whiteness and thought of the lonely house at the edge of the village. Loon let herself drift toward the window and touched the cold glass with the tip of her nose. Another echo rose, a quiet conversation overheard days before. grown-ups speaking in low tones while they mended and stirred pots. Words not meant for little ears had floated through the room anyway. "He lives alone there," someone had said, meaning the one who kept the house beneath the pines. "He is used to it," another voice had replied, but there had been a sigh folded into the sentence, as if being used to loneliness did not make it less real. The window remembered how the child had pretended not to listen, tracing small shapes in the condensation, while the idea settled like a seed in freshly turned soil. A candle in that distant house, always burning, had suddenly taken on a new meaning, not just a habit, but a call. Back at the small table, the gift had slowly taken shape. Loon sensed threads of many evenings woven into it, bits of spare cloth saved, crumbs spared from the family's own modest stores, a small object carved from wood in secret moments, its edges sanded smooth by patient fingers. The echo did not show the gift fully. It did not need to. The feeling was enough. Every element contained a piece of the child's gentle wish to offer warmth, to offer light, to tell someone without using grand words that they were seen, that they were not forgotten. The table held the memory of little hands tying the cloth, fumbling once, then tying again more carefully. It remembered the pause before the knot was pulled tight, as if the child were binding not only fabric, but resolve. The red scarf had been wrapped last, pulled around small shoulders with almost ceremonial care. Loon saw the child's fingers working at the wool, smoothing its length, tucking it in just so. The mirror, a dull, slightly warped bit of glass hanging on the wall, remembered a determined face, gazing back a face, not brave in any heroic sense, but steady with kindness. Lips moved, forming words barely breathed. "I will go while the snow is still falling. I will be like another candle in the dark." The mirror, accustomed mostly to reflecting ordinary tasks, combing hair, adjusting caps, held this secret vow with quiet pride. Loon withdrew gently from these echoes, carrying their softness with her as she returned to the lane where the child now walked. The present of that old day folded around her again, the muffled sound of boots in snow, the cool weight of white on rooftops, the faint, silvery hush of distant bells. She could feel the promise now as a distinct presence, almost like a second figure walking beside the child. It was woven into the bundle, stitched along the scarf, tucked into the folds of the cloak. The promise made each breath a little deeper, each step a little more deliberate. It was not heavy. It did not burden the child. It warmed, and yet, as Loon followed, she began to sense something else weaving itself into the echo, as subtle and fine as a single hair caught in cloth. Doubt did not arrive as a sudden turn. It drifted in slowly, the way a cloud can slide across the face of the sun without anyone quite noticing the first change in light. Perhaps the child remembered how far it was to the edge of the village, or the stories told about the deeper snow beyond the last houses. Perhaps a parent's caution, heard earlier and filed quietly away, now fluttered up like a hesitant bird. The lane itself remembered small hesitations, footsteps that slowed, a hand tightening briefly on the bundle, a glance thrown back toward the smoke rising from familiar chimneys. Loon brushed against a boundary stone set low by the path, its top just peeking from the snow, and felt the echo of many turnings. This was a place where people often chose to go on toward the fields or to circle back toward the square. The stone recalled small feet that had stopped here more than once on that winter day. Turning to look both ways, heart pulled in two directions. It remembered the child's breath quickening, then steadying, then quickening again. It held the faint imprint of a decision deferred an almost step toward the farther way, followed by a gentle turning back, as if the thought had been folded up again and placed carefully aside. The promise, Loon realized, had slipped not in a dramatic moment, but in many small, quiet fractions of moments. A pause here, a reconsideration there, a promise to oneself of tomorrow that drifted away with the evening smoke. Somewhere between the square and the outermost houses, between the warmth of what was known and the cool mystery of what lay further on, the child's intention had loosened its hold on the day. The gift, still tender, still precious, had never quite crossed the invisible line that led to the lonely house at the edge. The scarf had still been red, the snow still kind, the heart still gentle, but the path of the promise had curled back upon itself and ended where it had begun. As Loon listened to this realization, a soft sadness rose from the stones and from the snow, not sharp, not accusing, but tender, like the memory of a song that stops one note before its end. The village itself had noticed, though no one had spoken of it aloud. The gate that had watched the child turn homeward carried a faint echo of perhaps another day that never came. The bench in the square, in later winters, had felt that absence whenever snow fell in quite the same way. The boundary stone kept the weight of that unfinished choice in its ancient body like a small, unhealed hollow. Loon's gentle heart absorbed that feeling in silence. She did not judge the child. She understood how large the world can feel when one is small, how long a path can seem when it leads toward someone unknown, even when kindness is the lantern in one's hands. The promise had not been broken out of cruelty or indifference. It had simply grown shy and gone to sleep, tucked away in the folds of time. And yet it had not vanished. It lingered, a quiet echo inside other echoes, calling softly to anyone who could hear past the years. Now, in the present night witch's cottage, where her small body lay warm upon the old chair, that call had reached Loon. It had traveled through wood and stone, through iron and glass, through every memory that had brushed against it, until it found the ears of a cat who could read echoes as others read pages. Standing in the snow of 2 centuries ago, her silver eyes gentle and thoughtful, Loon understood that this unfinished winter kindness was what had drawn her across time. It was not a wound she had been shown, but an open space, waiting patiently, like an unlit candle beside a window. And somewhere within her, quietly and steadily, she began to feel the forming of her own promise, one made not in words, but in the way she listened, that she would walk softly through this old day and in whatever small way she could, help the forgotten winter promise find its rest. In the layered hush of the old winter day, time curled around Loon like a soft silver ribbon. She stood again at the low boundary stone where the child had hesitated, feeling in the cold memory of the rock both the strength of the promise and the quiet weight of the turning back. Yet even here, in this place of almost choices, the silver thread of echo did not fray or end. It extended onward, slender and luminous, into the whiteness beyond the last cluster of houses. Loon, whose task was not to reproach the past but to read it, lowered her head as if in greeting to the patient stone, and then stepped forward along the faint path that shimmered beyond what had been walked. The snow beneath her paws belonged fully to that winter day, but the line she was following carried something more delicate. Not only what had happened, but what had been so deeply intended that it left its own trace on the world, like a breath that still lingers in cold air long after lips have closed. The cottages grew sparser as she walked, their roofs stooping low under the soft weight of snow, their small windows turned inward toward warm hearths. Between them, narrow passages opened toward the fields, where fences and hedges curved away into the distance like gentle strokes of charcoal across a pale page. Ahead, the land dipped slightly, and in that hollow lay the river, its presence not yet visible, but already felt. The air grew subtly different, thinner and more open, carrying a distant coolness that did not come merely from snow. Loon could sense the way the water's memory lay quiet beneath its frozen skin, still and deep, listening upward to the winter sky. As she descended the gentle slope, the echo brightened. The river appeared below, a smooth band of muted silver cutting through the white of the fields. Ice had taken its surface in a wide, calm sheet, not cracked or fierce, but even and glass-like, with only faint, cloudy patches where currents still whispered beneath. On either bank, lanterns had once been set in a line, their bases half buried in snow, their small panes glowing like low stars. In the echo, those lanterns shone soft and golden, each flame cupped by glass against the winter air. Their light trembled upon the frozen river in narrow, shimmering paths that crossed and overlapped, as if many small bridges of fire had been drawn upon the ice by a steady hand. The lanterns were not there in the child's exact moment. Loon understood that instinctively. They belonged to evenings on other winter days, to simple village festivals when people gathered to remember stories, or to give thanks that the river had not flooded that year. But their memories clung to this place so strongly that they rose as soon as she touched the snowy bank with her paws. The wooden handles recalled fingers lifting them, the glass remembered breath clouding faintly upon its surface as someone leaned close to check the wick. The river itself remembered how the lantern reflections had drifted gently when the ice was thinner, how the light had turned the dark water into a soft, flowing tapestry of gold and silver. All of these recollections overlapped, creating a path of warm light through the echo, a path the child had imagined so vividly that it, too, had become part of the river's long remembering. Loon moved closer, following the line where snow met the frozen edge. The bank here was not high, but it had a slow, graceful curve, like the hollow of a giant palm. Bare willow branches arched above, their thin fingers etched against the pale sky. In some places, the wind had swept the snow into subtle ridges, each one catching the low light in a slightly different shade of white. The silence was deep, but not empty. It was filled with the gentle presence of water held still, of earth resting, of branches sleeping. When she lowered her head, Loon could feel through her whiskers the quiet pulse of the river below, patient and dark, dreaming under its glassy shield. Near one of the places where lanterns had often stood, she placed a paw upon a buried stone that marked the path. The stone's echo rose with a clear, delicate note. It remembered boots passing in careful steps, children being told to walk only along this safe line, hands reaching out to brush snow from its surface to reveal the guiding shape. It remembered the soft murmur of voices weaving in and out of the sound of the river, and the distant laughter of someone whose breath had turned the cold air into a brief, bright cloud. Loon stayed with that memory for a moment, feeling its gentleness. Then, as she listened a little deeper, she felt another presence layered within it, the slender imprint of a smaller figure, standing slightly apart and watching the lantern path with wide, thoughtful eyes. The child with the red wool scarf had come this far, at least in hope and imagination. Perhaps on a previous day, walking with a parent's hand in theirs, they had seen the lanterns burning in a quiet line along the river and had felt something stir inside, a sense that light placed carefully in darkness could make the world feel softer. Perhaps they had traced the shape of those memories over and over in their mind until the idea of walking this way alone, with a gift hidden under a cloak, seemed not frightening but beautiful. The stone at Loon's paw held the tremor of that feeling, the way it had rippled through the child's small body like the first step of a song beginning. Loon lifted her gaze, and in the echo, the scene around her shifted tenderly. The lanterns, which had been glowing only as a composite of many evenings, now brightened into one particular vision, not a day that had fully happened, but the day the child had dreamed. In that soft imagining, the river lay under deepening twilight, the sky washed with gentle blues and faint early stars. Lanterns dotted the bank on both sides, lit one by careful hands, their flames bowing slightly in the mild breath of wind. The child walked between them, red scarf wrapped close, bundle held safely against their chest. As they walked, each lantern flame seemed to lean inward just a little, as if greeting them, as if recognizing the small, brave glow of intention within their heart. Though Loon knew she was inside an echo of possibility rather than fact, she did not feel disappointed or misled. In the world of time's softer traces, what might have happened and what did happen sometimes lay very near each other, like twin reflections in still water. The lantern path by the frozen river belonged to both, to evenings when villagers truly lit their way with glass and flame, and to that inner path the child had traced for themselves in secret, promising to follow it to the lonely house beneath the pines. The echo cradled both truths together. Loon walked slowly along the bank, letting her awareness brush each remembered lantern. Each one offered her a slightly different warmth. Here, the memory of laughter. There, the memory of silence. Further on, the memory of someone pausing to close their eyes and simply breathe in the beauty of light on ice. At a certain bend in the river, where the frozen surface widened and the bank dipped low, she felt the child's promise most strongly. The snow here, in the echo, held the faint impression of small boots walking alone, not in a crowd, not as part of a festival, but in the quiet of late afternoon when the sky had already begun to dim. The river remembered the way the scarf's red reflection had trembled on the ice, brief but vivid, like a tiny thread of color laid upon silver cloth. It remembered the way footsteps had slowed, how the child had turned their head toward the far bank, where the dark line of pine trees rose like a sleeping wall against the sky. That was the direction of the house where the candle waited, where a solitary light burned most evenings as the rest of the village settled to sleep. Loon followed the line of the child's gaze to that distant edge. The trees stood tall and quiet, their branches dusted with snow, their trunks close together. Between them, if one looked carefully, there were gaps where onion-shaped drifts had formed, pockets of deeper stillness. The echo carried a faint scent from that place, not really a smell, but a memory of one. The resinous, clean hush of pine needles, the cool breath of untouched snow, a trace of wood smoke from a small, steady chimney. Harmony lay there, and also solitude, like a soft note held a little longer than all the others in a song. The river knew this and held it, and the child had known it in their own way, feeling it as a gentle pull each time they saw that far candle glow. Standing on the remembered bank, Loon let her tail curl around her paws and listened with her whole being. She could feel the shape of the unfinished walk now. The child would have followed the lantern path, their small body moving between threads of golden light, their breath rising and falling in calm rhythm. They would have crossed the shallow path where the river narrowed, or perhaps skirted its edge until they came to a place where the bank met the pines. Then they would have raised a mittened hand and knocked, very softly, on a door that was used to the sound of silence. A simple knock, a simple gift, a simple exchange of words in the dim glow of a stranger's room. These were the things the winter day had made room for, and though the steps had not been taken, the space they would have traveled remained, like an unplayed melody that still hums faintly in a musician's fingers. In that awareness, Loon felt no urgency, only a quiet deepening of her own resolve. The lantern path by the frozen river had never quite held the child's footprints all the way to the pines, yet the echo of those almost steps had steeped into the place. The river remembered them. The stones remembered them. Even the bare willow branches remembered how they had imagined bowing gently over a small, brave figure. Time had not forgotten. It had simply folded that tender intention away, waiting for someone gentle enough to notice its lingering warmth. Now, As Loon walked along the bank in her own present-bound way, she understood that she was not here to change what had been, but to learn the shape of it so completely that, when she returned to her village under the current moon, she could walk some quiet path of her own that would let the unfinished kindness finally rest. She lifted her head, and her silver eyes followed the curve of the river as it slipped under the arch of a small, snow-capped bridge and wound out of sight. Above, the sky and the echo held no storm, only a tender, diffuse light, as if winter itself wished to reassure every living thing that it would not be cruel. The lantern reflections shimmered once more, then softened as though someone had gently blown upon the flames. Loon breathed in the cool, silent air, letting it meet the steady warmth at the center of her small body. Somewhere, very far away and very close at once, she felt the true present night river flowing in darkness under stars, and the real village sleeping, unaware. Between those two layers, like a thin, shining path of its own, lay the echo of the lanterns of light placed carefully along ice, of a child's promise, of a simple road toward a lonely house. Loon, the cat who could read echoes, walked that path until it curved toward the shadow of the pines, carrying with her the memory of every gentle flame. Beyond the curve of the frozen river, where the lantern echoes faded into a soft shimmer and the village fell away into open whiteness, the land rose again in a slow, gentle swell. Loon followed the silver thread of memory up that slope, her paws brushing through the old snow as if through thought. The air here was different, even within the echo. It felt clearer, thinner, as though the world were speaking more softly, careful not to disturb something fragile and important. Ahead, the dark line of pine trees drew near, their tall shapes etched against the muted winter sky. They stood like quiet guardians along the boundary between the village and the wider world, each trunk straight and patient, each branch holding a small weight of snow that glowed faintly in the pale light. As Loon approached, she felt the pine's long, deep echo rise to meet her, scented with resin and thyme, and the cool hush of many winters layered gently upon one another. The snow beneath the trees was different from the snow in the open fields. Here it lay in softer drifts, shaped by the slow fall of needles and the shelter of branches above. In some places, it piled into rounded mounds at the bases of trunks, as though the trees were wearing white, sleeping shoes. In others, the earth showed through in small patches of dark, rich brown, where roots had disturbed the snow's even blanket. The air under the pines was calm, almost windless. Sounds that might have traveled freely over the open ground, distant voices, the creak of a cart, the muted ring of a bell came here as faint, softened whispers. The world felt wrapped, as if someone had drawn a gentle curtain of green and white around this place. Loon stepped lightly among the trees, her fur catching the faint smell of sap and bark, and listened. The house revealed itself slowly, as if shy. At first, Loon saw only a hint of straight lines between the trunks, a vertical shape that was not tree, a horizontal edge that was not branch. Then, as she moved forward, the pines parted to show a small, low-roofed cottage nestled deep among them, its walls built of stone that had darkened and mellowed with age. Snow had settled thickly upon the roof, smoothing its lines, and gathered along the narrow windowsills like folded cloth. A short path led from the front door to the edge of the trees, but even in the echo, it appeared only lightly trodden, as if few feet had pressed it through the winters. The cottage sat quiet, not unfriendly, only very accustomed to its own company. It watched the world through small windows that held more sky than street. One of those windows, facing a gap between the pines where a sliver of the village could just be glimpsed, remembered best. Loon lifted herself up onto a low drift beside it and placed her front paws on the stone sill. The glass, its surface faintly wavering, met her gaze with a deep, steady echo. Year after year, winter after winter, it had framed the same simple scene, snow falling in soft, unhurried strokes, the faint glow of lanterns by the river, sometimes visible at the edge of sight, the distant, comforting smudge of smoke rising from village chimneys. Inside, near this very pane, a candle had often burned one small, faithful light placed carefully at dusk and allowed to shine long into the evening. The window remembered the gentle routine of it, the scrape of the chair being drawn closer, the soft sound of a match, the brief flare, then the calm golden flame reflected in the glass. It remembered a hand, always the same hand, shielding that flame from drafts, adjusting the candle's base, making sure it stood straight and unwavering. Loon pressed her nose lightly to the cold glass, and the echo of the house's solitary inhabitant unfolded for her, not in sharp images, but in a tender succession of impressions. There was the sense of a figure moving through the narrow rooms with measured steps, not hurried, not heavy. There was the quiet rhythm of tasks done alone, wood brought in and stacked by the hearth, bread sliced and laid on a plate for one, letters or small carvings arranged neatly on a table and then left undisturbed. The walls held the faint memory of humming no full song, just small threads of melody, as if music were being tested gently on the air to see if it still knew how to rise. The house had been lonely. That much was clear, but not bitter. Its loneliness was like a thin veil, transparent and light, through which warmth still shone. The candle in the window was the clearest point of all. Each winter evening, as the pale light faded from the sky and the first true stars began to appear, the inhabitant would place the candle on the sill and light it. Sometimes they would stand there a while, hands resting on the wood, looking out toward the village with a gaze that the glass remembered as both soft and searching. Loon could feel, through the layering of years, the quiet wish that lay behind that simple act. Not a great longing for crowds, not a desperate plea for company, but a small, steady hope that somewhere, someone might see this light and understand that a heart was awake here, watching the snow fall just as they were. The candle was the house's way of saying, without words, I am here. With that understanding glowing gently inside her, Luna let the echo shift, guiding her to the particular winter day whose unfinished promise had called her across time. The snow outside the cottage window was deeper now, and the light thinner. The candle had not yet been lit. It sat unburning on the sill, wick dark, its stub of wax patiently waiting. Within the house, the inhabitant moved through the familiar motions of late afternoon, straightening objects that did not really need straightening, smoothing a folded cloth that was already smooth. The pines outside bent slightly in a mild breeze, shaking down a few soft flurries of snow that drifted past the glass like tiny, silent feathers. The world was very quiet. Then, in the echo, something new stirred. Loon felt it first in the pines. Their tall bodies remembered how, for one brief, particular moment, the pattern of sounds and stillness changed. A faint crunch of snow reached them from beyond their outermost roots, a rhythm too light to belong to adult steps, too careful to belong to someone hurrying on business. The branches, though they had no eyes, had felt that small difference and held it in their memory like a sudden brightening of dawn. Loon, listening in that remembered stillness, heard it too. The child with the red wool scarf had come this far after all, at least for a moment. Their boots had pressed into the untouched snow at the edge of the trees, bringing the warmth of the village's breath and the trembling heartbeat of their promise into this quiet, pine-scented world. She turned her attention toward the path leading from the village, and the echo obliged her. There, among the trunks, faint and fine as a drawn line of smoke, she saw the outline of small footprints approaching. The child's figure formed gradually, as if the memory were shy of fully revealing its missed possibility. Loon saw the red scarf first, a stroke of deep color against the white and green, then the curve of a cloak, then the suggestion of gloved hands clutching something under its folds. The child had indeed reached the boundary where the pines began, their feet standing on the threshold between the known fields and the quieter space of the cottage. From here, the house was plainly visible. A low shape under its snowy roof, a dark door, a window waiting for its evening candle. The distance was not great, only a few dozen small steps, yet in the echo, those few steps stretched out, long and uncertain. The pines held the feeling of that pause with exquisite clarity. They remembered the way the child's breath had come faster, clouding the air. They remembered a small boot shifting in place, pressing deeper into the snow instead of forward. They remembered the faint, inward turning of the child's body, as if a hand from far behind had whispered, "This is enough. You have come far. You may go back." Loon sensed the child's thoughts as a series of gentle waves, touching and withdrawing from the shore of action. What if the person in the house did not wish to be disturbed? What if it was rude to bring a gift uninvited? What if the snow grew heavier on the way home, and someone in the village worried when the child did not return quickly? None of these were unkind thoughts. They were simply the careful considerations of a gentle heart, trying not to trouble others. Inside the house, the inhabitant did not yet know that someone stood just beyond the ring of pines. The echo from within showed only a figure glancing toward the window a little earlier than usual, hand hovering near the unlit candle, then drifting away again. Perhaps they, too, felt something at the edge of awareness, a prickle on the skin, a small stirring in the air, the way one sometimes senses that one has almost been called by name. But no knock sounded, no shadow crossed the glass. The moment when two hesitations might have resolved into a meeting passed like a cloud over a pale sun. Lune watched, her heart as quiet and open as the snow at her feet, as the child's faint outline half turned and then fully turned back. The red scarf, which had seemed to glow with forward motion, folded in upon itself as the child drew the bundle closer under their cloak. Slowly, carefully, small steps retraced the path away from the pines, each footprint fitting its own shape again, deepening rather than extending. The pines remembered how their branches did not rise in celebration that day, but neither did they droop in sharp sorrow. They simply held the pause, the almost knock, in their rings and roots, letting it become part of the long story of snow and seasons. The house, too, remembered in its own way. The window recalled a brief, inexplicable sharpening of its awareness of the outside, as if the world beyond had leaned a little nearer and then gently drawn back. The unsent gift remained beneath the cloak, and later that evening, it would be set down on the small table in the child's home, its cloth still tied, its intention still glowing softly within. Perhaps it was never unwrapped. Perhaps it was opened and its pieces folded into daily life, a simple, carved thing placed on a shelf, a bit of bread eaten, a scrap of fabric sewn onto another garment. However it happened, the shape of the original promise, "I will bring light to someone alone," did not complete its intended arc. It did not cross the final space between the pines and the door. In the echo, that untraveled distance stayed bright and open, like a short stretch of path that snow continues to fall upon, smoothing it, but never erasing the possibility of footsteps. Lune remained near the cottage a while longer, absorbing the gentle longing that emanated from its stones and beams. There was no accusation in it, no sharp ache, only a soft, almost musical note of almost, held very quietly through the years. In later winters, the candle still burned in the window, its flame as steady as before. The inhabitant continued their small rituals. The pines continued to hold snow and shadow. Life went on, as it always does. Yet when the snow fell at a certain angle and the river's distant glow touched the edge of the trees, the house would remember that one day, when someone had come very close to its door with kindness in their hands and had not quite arrived, gently, very gently, Lune touched her paw to the stone of the cottage's foundation. The echo rose around her like a slow, calm tide, pine hush, candlelight, the distant shimmer of lanterns on ice, a child's paused steps, the unsent gift, the unknocked door. She let it all wash through her, her small body steady, her silver eyes soft. She was not here to reopen an old longing, but to acknowledge it so fully that it could loosen and sigh. In the present night village, beyond the reach of this echo, the witch's cottage stood under a different sky, its own candle burning low, its own hearth humming. Between that warm room and this quiet house beneath the silent pines, Loon felt a bridge forming, not of ice or stone, but of understanding. When she finally stepped back from the window and turned away from the house, it was with a feeling not of sorrow, but of deep, peaceful clarity. She knew now the shape of the story the echo held: a village, a winter day, a lantern path, a child's promise, a house that waited, and a space left open between them. That space was where her own gentle work would begin, carrying the memory of the candle and the pines within her like a soft, steady light. Loon followed the silver thread back through the snow, ready to return, when the time was right, to her own present, and to find there quiet ways to let this old, unfinished kindness finally come softly home. The echo of the house beneath the silent pines did not close with a sharp sound. It folded inwards, slowly and peacefully, like the last petal of a night-blooming flower. Loon stood for a moment in that old snow, listening to the quiet she had uncovered, feeling how the almost knock and the unsent gift still drifted through the air like a faint, unfinished note. Then, as gently as she had stepped into the winter day from 2 centuries before, she allowed herself to step out of it. The pale sky of that long-ago afternoon dissolved into darkness. The pines blurred into shadow, and the frozen river's silver surface melted into the soft, amber glow of the witch's cottage hearth. Time did not jerk or shudder. It simply settled, like snow finding its place on a sleeping roof. She found herself once more curled on the witch's lap, her small body warm and relaxed, paws tucked beneath her chest. The witch's hand still rested lightly along her back, fingers curved in the softness of sleep. The fire had burned low, embers glowing in a quiet bed of ash. Shadows lay in gentle pools in the corners of the room, and the faint scent of herbs, wood smoke, and wool wrapped around Loon like a familiar cloak. Outside, the present night village was deep in its own winter stillness. The moon, higher now, shone with a clear, silver steadiness, and a frost so fine it was almost invisible traced soft patterns over the window glass. Loon's whiskers twitched once. She was back, yet within her, the echo she had traveled was still bright and whole, its story resting like a rolled parchment in her heart. She lay still for a while longer, letting the 2 times breathe together inside her. The long-ago snow and the frost on the present glass, the pine-scented hush and the quiet of the witch's shelves, the candle in the lonely window, and the low ember glow in the hearth. All of these overlaid one another in her awareness, like translucent layers of gentle color. She understood with a calm certainty that she could not reach back and change the child's steps, could not make the small hand knock on the door it had passed. The winter day had been lived as it had been lived, and the child, now long gone to whatever rest time offers, had walked as far as their courage allowed. Yet echoes, Loon knew, were not chains. They were invitations. They did not demand that the past be rewritten. They only asked that the quiet wishes folded inside them be recognized and, if possible, carried forward. The witch stirred beneath her, not waking fully, but moving in that space where dreams and waking thoughts drift together like mist over water. Her hand slid once more along Loon's spine, slow and absent-minded, as if greeting her after a long, shared silence. "You've been far, little moon," she murmured, her voice low and rough with sleep, but gentle. "Sometimes old sadnesses find you, don't they?" Loon answered in the way she knew best. She pressed her head firmly into the palm that stroked her, a slow, insistent gesture full of soft, wordless assurance. The witch sighed, a long, peaceful breath that seemed to loosen something in the air. "Well," she whispered, already half sinking back into dreams, "if they come to you, perhaps it is because you know how to make them lighter." With that, she grew quiet again, her chest rising and falling in an even rhythm, her presence a steady warmth against Loon's side. The cat rose at last, unhurried but certain. She stepped down from the chair, landing without sound on the worn boards. The cottage welcomed her small movement with a faint rustle of echoes. The table remembering the day's simple meals, the kettle humming drowsily of steeped herbs, the shelves murmuring of countless evenings spent in the company of potions, books, and patient hands. Tonight, though, a new note wound through those familiar tones, the memory of the old winter promise she now carried. It shone within her like a tiny, steady star, one that wished not to dazzle, only to guide. Loon padded across the room to the door, feeling the coolness that seeped in at its edges, the soft call of the night beyond. The door's wood, which remembered many comings and goings in many seasons, quivered faintly as she touched it with her paw. Outside, the village slept under a thin silver veil. A light powdering of snow had fallen, while the witch dozed and Loon listened to the past. It lay across the rooftops and lanes in a delicate, shimmering film, making the thatch and stone look as if they had been brushed with moonlight. The stars above were crisp and clear, tiny points of still brightness, and the moon poured its calm glow over everything, turning even the darkest corners gentle. No wind hurried through the streets, only a mild, almost caressing drift of air moved slowly along the walls, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and pine and cold earth. Loon stepped into this quiet, her paws making the softest marks in the new snow, and let the village's present echoes rise to meet her. The square, when she reached it, felt different from the one she had walked in the echo, yet it held the same patient heart. The well stood where it had always stood, its stones a shade more worn, its roof slightly more bowed. The stone bench along the wall was rounder at the edges now, its surface bearing the memory of many more winters, many more lives. Loon leapt onto it and sat in the center, tail wrapped neatly around her paws, and listened. The bench hummed with recollections of recent seasons, children swinging their legs, elders resting their backs. the witch sitting there at dusk with a basket of bread to share. Woven softly among these fresh threads was the faint, older warmth of the child who had once sat there so long ago, red scarf wrapped around a small neck, promise held under a cloak. That warmth no longer felt lonely. It felt like a question that had finally found someone willing to answer. Loon lowered her head briefly, as if nodding to that remembered child, then slipped down from the bench and moved toward the nearest house. A shutter there stood ajar by the width of 2 fingers, letting a line of golden light spill onto the snow. Within, someone was still awake. Through the tender blur of echoes, Loon sensed a woman bending over dough, shaping it into loaves for the early market. Her back tired, but her heart calm. The room around her felt full and yet a little hollow at the edges, as though it had room for one more presence, one more warmth. Loon scratched gently at the door, not urgently, not loudly, just enough to stir the air. After a moment, the latch lifted, and the woman's face appeared in the gap, framed by lamplight and steam. "Oh, you again," she murmured, recognizing the witch's cat by sight and by the particular quiet dignity of her posture. "Out in the cold, little one?" Her voice held no sharpness, only mild surprise and affection. Loon stepped forward, brushing past her legs into the room with the ease of a creature who knows it brings no trouble. The smell of warm dough and rising yeast enfolded her, comforting and soft. The woman watched as Loon walked not to the hearth, as another cat might have done, but to the corner where a basket of baked loaves already cooled on a cloth. The cat paused there, looking between the bread and the door with slow, deliberate calm. Something wordless passed through the woman's mind, an image, perhaps, of someone who lived alone at the far edge of the village, or of a neighbor whose window had seemed dimmer than usual that week. A quiet thought rose. There is more here than we need. She did not question the feeling. People who lived near witches and their cats often learned not to question gentle impulses that arrived in the middle of the night. With a small, decisive nod, she reached for one of the loveliest loaves, still holding a warm, golden heart beneath its crust, and wrapped it in a cloth. Her hands moved as though following a memory she did not fully recall. "Just a little kindness," she said softly, mostly to herself. "It will still be here in the morning, but it will be happier in someone's hands tonight." Loon watched, eyes half-lidded, content. When the woman set the wrapped bread by the door, intending to take it with her on her way to the fields at dawn, the room's echoes brightened, as if the walls themselves exhaled. In this way, Loon moved through the sleeping village, not as a messenger of urgency, but as a quiet silver thread weaving gentle acts into the present. At another house, she leapt onto a windowsill where a candle burned low beside a weary man's ledger. Her soft silhouette in the glass made him look up, and after a long moment, close the book and light a second candle, not for work, but for the sake of someone who came to mind suddenly, someone who might be gazing out at the same moon from a darker window. A little later, Luna curled herself for a time on the doorstep of an elderly neighbor who seldom ventured beyond her own hearth. When that woman opened the door in the morning and found, set there by unknown hands, a scarf, newly mended and folded, she smiled with a depth she had not felt in weeks, as if some old, quiet weight had lifted from her chest. Each small kindness the cat nudged into being was as simple as the gift the child had once carried. A loaf, a scarf, a candle lit not for one's own need, but to let someone else feel less alone. The villagers, waking and moving through the next days, did not connect these gestures to one another. They did not speak of a miracle or a mystery. They only felt, in subtle ways, that the village seemed softer. The square felt a little warmer even when the wind blew. The path by the river seemed to hold a new calm, as if some ancient sigh there had finally loosened and drifted away like mist at dawn. And at the far edge, where the pines still watched and the small house still lit its evening candle, the light in the window glowed a shade more peacefully, as though it had been quietly answered. No one saw Loon's work as a weaving of past and present, but the stones understood, and the doors understood, and the windows understood. The old winter sadness that had lingered like a thin veil over certain corners of the village grew lighter, thinned gently by each thoughtful act she helped bring to life. In the language of echoes, the unfinished note of the child's forgotten promise began to resolve, finding its place not in a loud chord, but in a series of soft, everyday sounds. A knock at a door, a candle being set on a sill, the stitching of wool, the breaking of bread. Loon walked among these sounds with quiet satisfaction, her fur touched by moonlight, her footsteps small and steady, carrying within her the knowledge that the story she had read in the past was, at last, finding a peaceful echo in the present. Morning arrived slowly over the village, as if it, too, preferred to linger a little longer in the warmth of sleep. The sky lightened from deep indigo to a soft pearl gray, and then to the faintest shade of silvery blue. Frost on the rooftops caught the first light and held it delicately, so that the thatch and tiles seemed dusted with powdered glass. Smoke rose from chimneys in calm, steady ribbons, each plume unfurling into the clear air before dissolving into nothing. The snow that had fallen in the night lay undisturbed in most places, except where a few early risers had already stepped out to tend animals, gather wood, or simply look at the beauty of the morning. The village breathed, quiet and peaceful, as if it had slept through a gentle dream it could not quite remember, only feel. Inside the witch's cottage, the light of day crept through the small window and laid a pale hand upon the floorboards. The embers in the hearth had sunk low, a soft bed of red and gray, but the room still held the night's warmth. The witch stirred in her chair, shawl slipping a little from her shoulders, hands loosening from their folded rest. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Loon, curled neatly on the rug before the fire, her silver fur faintly luminous in the half-light. The cat's body was relaxed, her paws tucked underneath, her tail wrapped tidily around herself, like a question answered and set down. "There you are," the witch murmured, her voice rough but fond. She stretched slowly, feeling the gentle complaint of her joints, then rose to feed the fire a few small logs. Sparks drifted upward, new flames licking the wood with soft, golden tongues. As the warmth blossomed, she watched Loon with an attentive eye, the way one watches a beloved clock to see if it keeps true time. There was a settledness around the cat, a quiet that was not emptiness but completion, like the stillness after the last note of a song has faded and left the air sweeter for having carried it. The witch did not need to know the details. She recognized the feeling. "So," she said softly, turning toward the window, "whatever called you has been gently answered." Loon blinked once, slow and serene, then rose to her feet and padded to the witch's side. She leapt onto the windowsill and sat there, nose close to the glass, watching the village wake. The witch joined her after a moment, resting her hand lightly on the cat's back. Together, they looked out at the small, snow-bright world. They saw a woman stepping out of her door with a loaf wrapped in cloth, pausing only briefly to gaze at the peaceful sky before making her way toward the edge of the village where the fields began. They saw a child, another child, from another time running across the square with a scarf flapping behind them, stopping midway to adjust something carefully left on the stone bench as if it were a present waiting for unknown hands. The witch's eyes softened. They'll never know quite why they woke with the feeling to give instead of keep, she whispered, more to the air than to Loon. But it doesn't matter. Kindness doesn't ask for explanations. Her fingers moved absent-mindedly in slow circles along the cat's spine. Old wishes sometimes slip through the cracks in time. If someone patient is listening, they find new hearts to rest in. Loon pressed gently against her palm, listening not only to the witch, but to the echoes that now floated through the present morning. They were lighter than before, their tones warm and clear. The quiet note of almost, which had once trembled at the edge of the village like a held breath, had softened into a deeper, more peaceful chord. It is enough. As the day unfolded, the village went about its simple tasks, unaware that the weight of a forgotten winter promise had been gently lifted, the square filled with the steady rhythm of life. Footsteps imprinting the snow, voices brisk but friendly, tools clinking, doors opening and closing with familiar thuds. The well, who had watched centuries pass with unhurried patience, felt the change and held it like a secret at the bottom of its dark water. When a villager drew up a bucket, the reflections on its surface seemed a little clearer, the sound of the rope a little more musical. The stone bench, when someone sat upon it to rest, offered its cool surface with an almost affectionate steadiness, remembering both the child from long ago and the cat who had listened so carefully on a winter night. Beyond the last houses, the path toward the river lay quiet. The ice that still held there glimmered softly under the pale sun, though in places thin, dark lines of water had begun to show where current and thaw worked slowly together. Loon, later that afternoon, walked there alone, her paws leaving small, neat prints along the bank. The lantern echoes greeted her, their old golden light now calmer, less tinged with longing. In the memory that rose from the stones, there was still the clear image of lanterns burning along ice, of families walking in small clusters, of laughter rising in white puffs from warm mouths. But now, when the river recalled the years between then and now, it carried with them the new knowledge of this night's quiet kindnesses, the extra loaf, the mended scarf, the candles lit with someone else in mind. The old, unfinished melody had found its last notes, not in grand gestures, but in a handful of simple acts that glowed like tiny flames along the path of time. At the edge of the pines, where the air grew still and green again, the little house beneath the branches received its share of that quiet healing. The inhabitant, who now belonged to Loon's own days rather than the distant past, never knew anything of the child who had once stood just beyond the trees, or of the unsent gift that had remained under a cloak 2 centuries ago. They only noticed that, this winter, neighbors who had rarely come so far along the path now arrived more often, sometimes with nothing more than a jar of soup, sometimes with a handful of herbs tied in a cloth, sometimes with the simple offer of sitting for a while to watch the snow fall together through the window. On certain evenings, as the candle in the pine-shadowed house burned, another light now answered it from a distant village window, a warm dot in the dark. 2 small flames, far apart yet aware of each other, wove a slender thread of brightness across the snowy fields. Loon visited that edge place only once, and only briefly, staying hidden at the line where shadow met light. She sat among the roots, her fur brushed faintly by snow-heavy needles, and listened. The echoes there had changed. The sharpest edge of solitude had rounded. The lingering echo of almost that had once hovered near the door had softened into a memory of footsteps that truly arrived, of knocks that were actually heard, of voices crossing a threshold and sharing warmth. It did not matter that those footsteps belonged to different people at a different time. In the language of echoes, these new kindnesses flowed backward and forward together, filling the old hollow with gentle light. Satisfied, Loon turned and walked home, leaving no disturbance behind her except a sense of comfort that the pines took into their rings. Night returned, as it always does, but it came with no sharpness. It descended like a great, soft cloak, draping itself over the roofs and lanes, settling quietly on the fields, resting its cool cheek against the river. The stars appeared one by one, steady and silver, like nails pinning a dark velvet cloth to the sky. The moon, round and luminous, climbed to her watchpost above the village and looked down with a calm, tender eye. The wind had grown milder, whispering only lightly at the edges of doors and chimneys, as if humming to itself. In many homes, candles were snuffed and shutters closed, but here and there a little square of light lingered, a warm eyelid not quite ready to close. In the witch's cottage, the evening settled into its most peaceful hour. The work of the day was done. Herbs hung in tidy bundles. Pots were rinsed and turned upside down to dry, and the books on the shelf leaned against one another like tired friends. The witch stood by the window with Loon in her arms, the cat's body a soft weight against her chest, her purr a faint, steady vibration. Together, they looked out at the snow-bright village. Somewhere, a late candle was placed in a window, not because of any great sorrow, but because someone thought, without knowing from where the thought had come, perhaps someone out there needs to see a little light tonight. The witch smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You hear so much more than I ever will," she told Loon softly, "but I hear enough to know you've done something gentle and important." She pressed her cheek briefly to the cat's head. "The past rests more easily now, and when the past rests," she added, her eyes drifting toward the distant trees and the dark curve of the hills, "the nights grow softer for us all." She moved away from the window, banked the fire to a low, glowing bed, and laid Loon gently on the pillow at the foot of her own narrow bed. Then she lay down, pulling the blanket over her shoulders, listening to the small, reassuring sounds of the cottage breathing around her. Loon curled into herself, paws tucked well beneath her, tail snug around her flank. She could still hear echoes. She would always hear them. But tonight, they were not calls for help or unfinished stories tugging urgently at her whiskers. They were simple, contented murmurs. The memory of bread being broken and shared, of laughter echoing softly under low ceilings, of doors opening in welcome, of footsteps walking home on paths that felt less lonely. These echoes did not ask anything of her. They stroked her like a soft, invisible hand, inviting her to rest inside them. Outside, the snow glittered faintly under the stars, each tiny crystal catching and releasing fragments of moonlight. The river moved beneath its thin lid of ice, flowing with patient, silver persistence toward places unseen. The pines stood guard at the edge of the world, their branches swaying ever so slightly as the wind combed through them with gentle fingers. Somewhere, an owl called once, low and distant, its note more like a sigh than a cry. The village, wrapped in its quilt of houses and fields and old memories, lay completely at peace. And now, as the night deepens and the story folds, itself closed like a pair of calm hands, may that same peace come to you. May you feel, around your own quiet body, a village of gentle things keeping watch. The soft gaze of stars, the slow breath of wind, the silver patience of moonlight resting on roofs and branches. May every echo of your day, every worry, every unfinished thought grow lighter and softer, like footprints filling slowly with falling snow. May your heart be wrapped, like the small gift beneath the child's cloak, in warmth and kindness. And may every window in your dreams hold a candle that says, without words, you are not alone. Sleep now, very softly, as the village sleeps, and let the night carry you on its quiet river until morning. May your rest be deep, your dreams be gentle, and may you wake as the winter light wakes over the rooftops calm, renewed, and quietly blessed by a cat who can read echoes, by pines that remember kindness, and by stars that shine their silver blessing upon every peaceful, sleeping heart.